Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the podcast that explores how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Goram, and I'm on a mission to help you turn the lights on behind the eyes of your people, light the fires within them, and help more of us lead successful, fulfilling work lives. This podcast is for anyone who believes that's worth going after and who's curious about what really drives people, culture and performance. Each episode, we dive into the ideas and conversations that help create what I call stickier businesses, places where people thrive and love to work and where customers stay, recommend you and love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Okay then, let me ask you something. When you hear the term global leadership, what does that actually mean to you? Is it about having offices in different countries? Is it about building diverse leadership teams? Or is it about something far more subtle and perhaps more difficult? The ability to genuinely understand difference, cultural nuance, and adapt your leadership accordingly. Because for me, being global isn't just a matter of geography, it's about awareness. It's about recognizing that what works brilliantly in one context may feel absolutely flat on its face in another. That communication styles vary, that expectations around hierarchy, feedback, challenge, and collaboration differ. And that high performance across cultures requires leaders who can flex, listen, and adjust, not just apply a very simple, single leadership template everywhere. Now, my guest today is Crispin Thompson, global leadership coach and founder of the Leadership Studio. And with over 25 years experience working across multinational environments, Crispin helps organizations develop leaders who don't just operate internationally, but who understand how to adapt across cultures to unlock brilliant performance. So in this episode, I'm hoping we'll get to explore what global leadership really looks like in practice, from understanding cultural nuance and adapting across contexts to developing talent you don't physically see and recognizing how communication can either bridge those gaps or unexpectedly widen them. So if your teams span time zones, languages and cultures, and you want leadership that truly travels, I think this episode is just for you. Crispin, welcome to the show, my friend.
Happy to be here. Yeah, this is going to be great topics, I think.
I hope so. It's one of those things that, if I'm honest, in my career, in my experience, I didn't see a lot of this. But today the world's smaller. People are working in far more diverse teams culturally, internationally. And, I've not had tons and tons of experience of leading teams like that. So I'm fascinated to speak to you, my friend. Before we get stuck into these, as you say, I think fascinating topics, please do me a favor, my friend. Can you just introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about your background and why this topic is fascinating for you too.
Yeah, my pleasure. For me, my journey across corporate America and kind of multinational corporations really let me see a lot of this, like this notion of what works and what doesn't. When are you leading global teams versus really, truly you're a global leader? So I spent 25 years at Hewlett Packard. And then stayed with HP until it split 10 years ago, and I went with Hewlett Packard Enterprise. And then went to a company called Taskus after that. I went to a company called QSC after that, and here I am kind of running the Leadership Studio. But my journey was interesting, right? Because when I started with that first company, they were only in the US, and then the second company was only in the US, and then Compaq bought us, and Compaq was everywhere, right? They were huge, giant, global. And about a year after they bought us, I rotated to Europe. And like a very classic American story, I didn't have a passport when I raised my hand and said I'd like this assignment. And then everything happened very, very quickly. I had to rush a passport and kind of blah, blah, blah. But I was suddenly in a different place. And, I was living in Scotland where English was spoken, but to my ear, Oof, that was a tough accent, especially Glasgow. That was a tough accent in the beginning, my beginning days, and just very subtle differences in phrasing and words and tone, and I felt more foreign probably in the first days and months than I should have, but
Mm,
I also got to see how do these international teams come together, where do we find common ground, and as my career grew, I was able to kind of see and do more things across different regions, and then eventually, as I achieved different levels of success within Hewlett Packard and beyond, my own teams were elsewhere. And for sure, at the end of my career at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, I didn't have any employees in my organization that were in the U.S. Every single employee in my whole organization, other than myself,
yeah.
was somewhere else. And what was very interesting about that was just like you said, kind of learning like how do you adapt, what
Mm,
works, what doesn't, how do you make these things functional in ways that are beyond just some metric on some scorecard. And I think there's a lot for us to talk about there. But I became very passionate about this. I felt that for budgetary reasons, I was building teams maybe in some of the other places in the beginning, but then I felt like I was seeing this sort of amazing untapped market of talent, and the different backgrounds, different perspectives were actually really, really beneficial in a lot of ways because it helped us, especially from a change management perspective. Like if you're
mhm.
rolling out something globally, it really helps to have people that are a little more local to where the things are happening that can explain, here's a pitfall that might happen, or here's something to consider, or God help me if there's legal things to consider. That there's a lot of traps around that all around the world. But really kind of engaging in those ways, I felt made me learn a lot about how to be a better, truly effective global leader. Yeah, that's kind of the journey that sort of led me here today. And now I spend my time like helping leaders kind of bridge potential to performance and kind of find their voice.
Yeah.
And if there's a global element to that, all the better. I feel like I have a wealth of just personal experience to talk about in that realm.
I think that's why I was fascinated and really pleased that you agreed to come on this show because we talk a lot about leadership and culture from various perspectives. And only to this date, I think a couple of conversations have really dug into the sort of the global element of it. Because I think as we look forward, it just stands to reason that you're going to be dealing with people who aren't in front of you and most
Mhm.
likely are in a different time zone to you more and more often. I mean, that's not a new thing. These teams have been operating for years and
Mhm.
years and years. But in our kind of new evolving workplace, I think it's become more common. And so it's going to be something more and more people have to try and understand. And you've unpacked a few bits already, but if I was to ask you how you would define global leadership, what are the sort of characteristics? What are the sort of key behaviors? What are the factors that we should be considering and maybe that we're going to pick about in today's conversation?
A few things that I think about a lot are one is in order to be effective as a leader of global teams, in the very beginning, it really just starts with listening.
Mm,
We need to listen to what's going on, what's working well, what's not. It's also about kind of engagement and inclusivity, but I mean inclusivity in the sense of making the people feel included in conversations and creating an environment where they feel that not only can they be honest, but they should be. Because unfortunately, sometimes when you've got the leader from the headquarters country talking to the people somewhere else, there's a maybe self-imposed barrier, but there's a barrier sometimes where the audience doesn't tell you the correct answer or the accurate answer. I'll say the accurate answer to the question you're asking out of some fear of reprisal, some
mm.
imagined thing of, oh, they want to hear what they want to hear, but you can't really improve things, and therefore you can't really have an organization that's going to feel connected to you, that you kind of believe in their own needs too. And so you kind of start off on the wrong foot if you don't create that environment right up at the beginning where people feel included and heard and seen and all these things.
Yeah. I think that psychological safety is really, really important. I suspect
Hmm.
it is even more of a minefield when you're dealing with international waters and cultural nuance within that. You know, what works in your own backyard may not necessarily create the same feeling somewhere else.
Yeah, and it just you just because you talk about this kind of these like little mines that sometimes we plant ourselves, and I'll give an example here. So
Mm,
prior to me taking on like truly massive global teams, I'd always had teams, but most of that were elsewhere, but most of them had usually been in Mexico. And so for maybe 8 or 10 years, I had been working with the sites in Guadalajara, and I had a strong familiarity there. I speak enough of the language to feel very comfortable and just a good affinity with the culture and attitude and everything. And so that I felt like that was giving me a nice air of kind of credibility to go and engage other places. But very quickly, when I was engaging with India, what I was kind of getting the feedback was that maybe I'm just talking about them too much, and it was kind of almost creating like I only care about the folks in Mexico, and so what that told me was this thing that I thought I was bringing, this credibility I could talk about having managed. I was over indexing, and back to this notion of listening and creating the environment. I myself, because I was trying to kind of evoke the right thing, was in fact creating the opposite. If I hadn't been willing to kind of stop and listen and ask for feedback, I think whatever traction I felt I was making in the beginning, we would have lost.
And that's great though, that a team is willing to sort of like give you that open and honest feedback. But like you say, it does come from the environment that we create. And I guess one of the things I've heard you mention in the research that I have done into you, it just sounds very creepy whenever I say that to a guest. It's not meant in a creepy way, Crispin. It's just meant out of respect, I think. And I've heard you talk about tokenism when it comes to sort of like
Mhm.
global leadership. And I'm wondering whether it links to some of the things you've just sort of said here, because I guess the credibility in which you sit within that global team at the time,
Mhm.
that the amount of belief that people have that you are listening to me, you are hearing me, you haven't got your pre-designed ideas about things. You're not just going to bring in your way of doing things and that's all we're going to see. I'm wondering whether that is linked to this tokenism trap that you've mentioned before. And if you would kindly unpack that for us as to
Mhm.
what that means, how that shows up, and actually maybe how that you've found ways, I guess, to avoid that trap.
Yeah, tokenism is it's a charged word, right?
Mm,
Because when you were talking about it, you're talking about you put someone in a place almost like not necessarily or observationally and potentially not because of merit, just because you needed someone in that box or from that location to kind of be at this level. And whether or not that happens as often as people think it happens, the impression is out there. But then you can also see really bad like leadership behaviors. One example I saw was I was being asked to kind of look at an organization and kind of do some assessments around what's working and what's not. And one of the things I saw was that at the staff level, let's say there were 8 people or 10 people who were at the direct staff level to the senior leader, but in fact there was staff and then there was staff,
mm.
and there was the people that were kind of organizationally really closest to the leaders. They were the ones that made all the decisions, and there were the other ones who felt like they were on the staff because there just needed to be a fixed number of people, and otherwise you couldn't host an organization or some other kind of HR mathematics that sometimes rule things. And so when ultimately that organization kind of rolled to me, there were two things I saw. One is that the people that had been a part of that kind of inner circle, their expectation was that they, by default, there was going to be an inner circle and that they were it. And then secondarily, because not only were there people that I was kind of keeping at the staff while I was bringing some other people up, they just naturally felt that there was like a junior senior thing,
Mm.
and this whole thing about the maybe that's even the first time that I heard someone actually kind of parrot that word back to me, that I'm just here as a token. And I was like, oh my gosh, what a horrible way to describe yourself, let
Yeah.
alone this kind of decision making you're ascribing to me now. And so what I believe is if we want to be really effective global leaders, and we need to truly build a global team, which means having leadership from multiple places around the world at that kind of senior staff level, then we have to make sure that we're telling everyone that each voice matters. Now, ultimately, the leader is going to make the decision they make, right? But we need to show kind of good collaboration and allow for the diversity of thought that comes from the magic of having global teams together truly gets played out. And if you're hitting a stumbling block, there's a one particular tool in my toolkit that I don't try to bring out too often for a lot of very obvious reasons is every once in a while there's going to be a very unpopular decision.
Mm.
Something has come down, there's some budget cut or some new thing we have to do, and whatever the answer ends up being will be unpopular. I would see this sometimes where I could just tell by knowing the people who worked for me where their kind of opinions were likely to be and who was likely to be the voice on one side or the voice on the other. But it's like a jury, right? I don't need all 12 to say yes, but I need them pulling toward the same direction. And so once or twice in my career, and I will never tell the people who worked for me when I did this, but once or twice in my career, I would come to the staff and say, listen, I know this is going to be unpopular, but this decision has come down and here's what we're going to do. And I would just put all my weight behind basically the worst choice.
Mm.
And like there was a bunch of different ways to do it, but this is the worst one. But I'm just saying this is my idea. We're doing it. And then let the team kind of implode a little bit for emotionally implode for a second and say, gosh, this is terrible. We can't do this. And let them kind of rally together because then they will collectively come together. They will help kind of create the better alternative. They'll kind of push me off of my idea, which in truth was never really my plan. It was a way to kind of pull this team of people who none of them, by the way, were in the same room with each other, right? So getting them all kind of emotionally and intellectually together, but also showing them that their voice matters here. And so in their eyes, they changed my mind. They dissuaded me. But for me, there's no loss, right? I can take an arrow once in a while to say, oh, Chris had a bad idea. I can deal with that. I'm sufficiently confident in my own intellect to accept that I have dumb ideas. It's fine. Sometimes not everything that comes out of my mouth is great, and I'm okay with that. But we get to the great ideas together. But also this helps me see like how do people think? And I think if you want to talk about what's a great aspect of a global leader, it's
Yeah.
really identifying how do the people who work within your organization, how do they think and how do they learn? Because if you don't know those two things, then you're likely to kind of apply a one size fits all type model, which won't work. Or you're likely to pick one or two styles that maybe indexes in one or two directions, but again, you're going to leave others left out, and then you're back to tokenism, right? You're back to part of this team now feels like I'm here because of mathematics, or I'm here because someone decided that we needed someone from India or Mexico or China or Romania or wherever the country is to be at staff level, not because I necessarily kind of earn my way in there. And if they themselves believe that they're part of this token trap, then guess what? They're not going to speak up. And even if they do speak up, they're not going to feel like their voice is being heard. And even when their voice is heard, they're going to feel like it was luck, not merit. And so not only is it a bad look for the leader, but it creates this kind of emotional paradox, right? Where they believe they're not there for the right reasons, therefore even the good things that happen aren't happening for the right reasons. And
I
then
think
so
the
you
belief
really,
thing's
yeah.
absolutely critical, right? Critical within that,
Mhm.
100%. I just what you just sort of said there about that listening and involving thing, without wanting to sound like an idiot. I mean, that's no real difference from being a good leader per se, right? I mean, there's
Mhm.
more, I guess there may be more nuance to how things are going to work and a proper understanding about different cultures, different countries, the way things operate. So understanding how these people think and act and behave is really important. But that's a generalized leadership skill, isn't it? What's the complication that we're dealing with here, do you think?
Well, I'll give you a couple of responses
Sure.
because I think for sure, yes, I would hope that is a
Hope's,
general leadership
hope's a
skill.
very good word there.
Yeah, and I would hope that it is applied frequently. But it's kind of like you're driving at night, it's not very busy, you come to a stop sign, there's no one there. Do you come to a complete stop?
Mm.
Probably not every single time, right? Even though like the rule is there and you should do it. And so I think even good leaders forget. And I think particularly if we have strong people around us who are maybe covering up our own gaps, we continue to fall into patterns. And so I go back to that hope piece. Right? I would hope that that's a normal part of the way that leaders lead. But I think creating intent there is, and truly, I use this phrase a lot with post-COVID world when we're so virtual, is listening for intent.
Yeah.
Because this is where little cracks can emerge, and cracks can become fissures, and fissures can eventually become canyons, right? Canyons that cannot be bridged. And even if we've got a team where everyone is speaking the same language, it doesn't matter what that language is, but if they're from different places, it's very likely that we have nuance to our speech,
Hmm.
or we have different affectations or patterns, or we have just personalities. And so one thing that I would see is that sometimes if I could go back and look at a transcript of what was said, I would come away thinking, wow, that was a really tough conversation. Look how focused and abrupt and just to the point to an aggressive way this person was. But if you go back and listen to the call, or better yet, if you could even see video recording, you could understand that there's ways to kind of manage around it. And so back to kind of, if you know how a person thinks, if you know how your team is likely to lean in certain ways, then it allows the leader to truly listen for the intent of the message rather than the exact explicit way that message was being delivered. And so culturally, some areas are more blunt than others. Culturally, some areas are more like obsequious, or like just they too praiseworthy sometimes than we want. And so we have to kind of understand what's that nuance there, and tease it out. And it's all the more so when the people are not right in front of you, right?
Yeah.
When we're all in one room, we have a fighting chance of reading faces, reading body languages, hearing the person to the right sigh that you cannot see on Zoom or Teams, especially if they're muted, right? You're never going to know.
No.
And so we have these cues. Now, when we're global, especially if we're global and virtual, the not only does the leader need to listen, but the leader needs to slow down a
Mm.
little bit. I think we should prioritize precision over speed. And because speed, the overused metaphor of you're turning the oil tanker or turning this, the aircraft carrier, truly, yes, these things take a while to turn, but more accurately, like, we won't always see how things are turning if we're trying so fast to turn, right? So we need to slow down a little bit. It's very good practice to make sure we're kind of delivering messages in digestible chunks. So if you've got something complex to deliver, it's better to kind of plan that out. That's going to be delivered over 1 meeting, 3 meetings, 5 meetings, whatever it is, so that everything can be digested, and the various teams around Earth can consume it and kind of understand where we're going, versus this, we're just going to lay it out right now.
Mhm.
Here's how it is, and do it. Speaking out of the other side of the mouth, I understand sometimes we have no control over the timeline, and we have to deliver that message. But if we've taken that time to kind of build that rapport and kind of understand, like, the belief systems, like you said before, of the individuals, and kind of cultural nuance, then even when we have to have that hard, fast, do it this way or no way type message, it can land easier if the leader is better able to kind of explicitly say, here's how it is, in a way that they believe that their audience can understand it. And maybe that's just, you say it one way and then say it another way and say it another way, even on the same call, knowing that you might sound repetitive in mass, but to individuals, you'll sound like, oh, this is how I needed to hear it. So it's kind of that. This is a really long answer
No.
to kind of agree with you, to say, yeah, this at the core, this is something that every leader should do. But I think it's kind of like, it's tenfold
I
when
was going to
it's
say,
truly global and you're trying to get it right, and you actually have to do it
yeah.
right. That's the other thing.
I think it's complex. It was a deliberately daft question because because I think, whilst, again, use the word intent, intentionally good leadership behavior to listen, right, to
Mhm.
understand and to adapt and flex your message to somebody so that they receive it in the best way. We hope that's standard. When you're dealing with different languages, different cultures, that isn't necessarily going to be interpreted in the same way if you deliver that message once. That is not being flexible, right? I get that. I also love the idea when you talked about playing back the transcript of a conversation. To me, that would allow you to properly interpret and respond to what we're saying, thinking about intent, maybe, or at least having an idea about intent. When you're
Mhm.
living it in the moment, you're in a far more emotionally reactive state. And if something doesn't quite land with you, or makes you feel edgy because it's been delivered in a way that that's not how I like to receive, or that's not how we do things here in this country, I'm not even going to hear you at that stage. So I think that flip from the sort of subjective stuff to the objective stuff, I think that's quite a big difference, maybe.
Yeah, let me react to that. So we're kind of hemming a little bit around emotional intelligence, right?
Mm,
Which is a absolute core needed attribute of any successful leader, especially if you want to be successful in kind of global organizations. But
mm,
let's say let's say I'm a leader and I'm delivering a perceived to be tough message. Doesn't matter what that message is, but perceived to be tough message. And the audience is new to me.
Mm.
And so I don't know, like in your country, how this would be received. I don't know. I haven't had enough time to kind of build rapport and
Sure,
understand. And
sure.
maybe I have no particular prior experience in that country, that region to kind of give me cues. But the emotionally intelligent leader is going to deliver the message and know that this is likely to be perceived as tough, no matter just in general. Like
Mm.
and so what I would do in that case is I would deliver a message and I would say, now I know what I just said might be tough to hear and might even be seen to be unnecessarily blunt or whatever the discussion is. And I said, so let me say this differently. And I would try just another path, even if it feels completely duplicated to the message,
Mm.
say the same thing in a slightly different way.
Mhm.
And so this notion of I always call it persona, but changing the message to the audience.
Yeah.
This notion of persona is super, super important to leaders that really want to be effective. And this is to any kind of big organization, whether it's like right in my backyard in San Antonio or if it's, across the globe. It's understanding how to tailor that message. And so this notion back to emotional intelligence, you're going to land that message in a slightly different way and then pause and say, I know this was a lot, and I know I said it slightly, the same message slightly differently. What is your feedback? What did you hear? What is your reaction? And let people give responses and make them understood that they're allowed to say within reason. They're allowed to say whatever is in them right then, so that we can. Because if someone says, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you spoke to me that way," that no one would ever say that here. I would say, first of all, let me apologize because that was not my intent.
Mm.
But please help me understand what was the component of it that most frustrated you or most angered you, so that we can talk through it. Or was it just the message itself? Because there's also a degree of we cannot get past this that
Yeah.
also has to kind of work through there as well.
I would imagine, and again, this is my complete ignorance. So if there are people listening to this going, "You are an idiot, Andy." Yeah, I am, maybe on this particular topic, and which is fine, which is why I'm trying to find out more. But if you're inexperienced, maybe there's a temptation to segment the team, right? So if for this lot, I'll talk to this lot on their own, and I'll give it this way, and for this lot, I'll talk to this lot, and I'll do it in that way. And there's a trade-off there of the sense of team of delivering these messages, right? So you might have a culturally diverse group in front of you, and to
Mhm.
make things easy for you, right, I'm just going to segment the team up, and I'll do 4 different types of message, and we win.
So
But then you lose that sense of team, right? I mean, that must be a trade-off somewhere.
yeah, but let me give you a slightly let me counter that a little bit too,
Yeah.
because that's just a tactic, right? So if the strategy is I need to land the message so that everyone understands it, one
Sure.
tactic is you get everyone together and we talk about. Another tactic might be, let me meet you where you are.
Yeah.
And if I was going to do that, if I was going to segment by geography and deliver messages like that, I would also want to show that I'm doing it kind of outside of my normal time zone, right? So it's
Yes.
not just about I'm talking to this country and then I'm going to talk to this country, because then you're right. Someone's going to see this as, are we really a team?
Yeah.
And even worse, someone somewhere will think, what did they hear?
Yes, exactly
Okay,
that.
and we don't want that. And so what I would do is I would create multiple meetings across, some of which were maybe painful to me from a time zone perspective. And then of course I would say, here's what I want here. But then I would also add others. If you also want to join this one that's more in the European time zone, but you're in Japan or China or India, wherever, feel free, right? So that we're also showing that there's transparency, that
Yeah.
that this is not about the message is any different. It's me trying to meet these individuals where they are and kind of come outside of my normal, very comfortable time zone kind of aspect. So I think there's a piece there, but the other way to do that is if you don't want to have the 4 calls, they're gonna maybe all be huge because everyone decides to attend every call. The other thing you could do is you could set up, let's say, the calls by geography without including anyone else, but then you do a follow-up later to
Mm.
get everyone together to discuss, okay, now we've each had these sessions. I thought we had great feedback. I would lead off with, here's what I heard from Eastern Europe, here's what I heard from India, here's what I heard from South Pacific or Mexico, wherever, and let people kind of surface that maybe there's some commonality,
Mm.
maybe there's some difference in nuance, and then we would start with what was different. Okay, this was brought up in the UK, but not in Mexico. Let's talk
Mm.
about why. or this was brought up in Germany, but not in Kansas. Let's have a why. Like so these sort of things, and that way you're getting past that piece of he's treating us different or he's segregating us in some way, and you're getting to the understanding of, okay, I understand now why the messages were delivered this way, but now we're allowed to kind of see and talk to each other, and continuing to create that team environment, and foster the right collaboration, and also hopefully see that the leader put a lot of time into, and notice this is a lot of work for the leader, right?
Yeah.
That's the For every trade-off you get for having someone else to do your slides, the leader has to make the extra effort to focus on engagement and building the right cultures and pulling things together, and having like strategies that people can kind of understand and align to. And so maybe there is less finger to keyboard work for that leader, but there's a lot more, I would say, actual effort that has to go in order to be successful in these areas.
I think that's a super point. And I think that's some of it, potentially the unseen stuff here. And another nuance to that global leadership role. There are many parallels we can make to segmenting teams, whether they're at home or abroad or whatever. But I think it is this need to really intentionally think about engagement on a different level,
Hmm.
and comes back to your avoidance of the tokenism trap. It's, yeah, I'll meet you on my favorite time at this time. Thanks. I know it's tough for you, but hey, I'm a busy man. And you don't really mean that much to me. Whereas actually meeting them where they are, I think it's a lovely, lovely premise. And again, fosters perhaps more trust, more feelings of belief and psychological safety and all those sorts of bits over time. I think this is sort of pointing towards something else that I've heard you talk about, this CQ, this cultural intelligence
Hmm.
stuff, which to me, if I think about how I might interpret that, feels like an added complication and nuance here. So we've talked about how we might engage, how we might communicate, how we might break things up, how we might avoid tokenism. But when we're really talking about cultural intelligence, I mean, this is where I think some of the biggest challenges come, right? The differences in approach to work, approach to
Hmm.
hierarchy, respect, language. This must be, I guess, one of the fundamentals, right, that a successful global leader really needs to get their head around.
Yeah, and obviously there's multiple approaches,
Hmm.
and I would say that I'm in the camp of it helps me to know more about the area kind of in general, a little bit about them, their culture, their history. That does a bunch of things for me, right? Obviously, it helps me just kind of ingratiate myself with the local audience a little bit. If I can understand, oh, this is important, or oh, they've got a holiday next week that none of us had heard of. Let's hear about it, so we can kind of better understand. These little things matter, right? Because they show that the leader cares. But I think kind of understanding the cultural nuance, maybe a little bit of the recent history, recent meaning last like 50, 70, 80 years of kind of what's going on there,
Yeah.
will also help me in terms of like, how do we deliver messages? How do we
Mm.
land them? How do we make sure that we're engaging properly, this whole like cultural intelligence or CQ kind of piece? Now, there's another way to do this. Obviously, I'm in the headquarters. I understand things are different here, but you have to come meet me where I am, right? There's a lot of leaders, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily better or worse.
Mm.
It creates a very different style, and it creates a very different kind of bifurcated culture
Hmm.
between how things are in the local country versus how they are in the headquarters. You can do a lot of great things in those environments, and I think the challenge, right, really is going to become when things aren't running as well.
Mm.
Because when things aren't running as well, if you've not spent the time kind of building rapport, if the only rapport you have is I am above you in the hierarchy, therefore you shall do, it's very difficult when you're not physically in front of them when things aren't going well to help kind of motivate them,
Mm.
because they don't, I've always been we're going to create a team. My cultural organizations are going to be very flat from a hierarchy perspective, because I always believe that all leaders can and should be able to kind of interact across levels.
Yeah.
But it also means that when things don't go well, because those teams have felt seen and heard, they're more willing to run through a wall or run to the fire, that things happen, versus having to be told to. And sometimes those days or weeks of lapse because they're not proactively doing it, because they're waiting to be told because you told them how to do everything else. those things matter, right? You'll slow down implementations, you'll slow down fixes, your own external experiences that you're delivering to your own customers or partners or salespeople. Those things will suffer in the meantime as well,
Mm.
and morale, and it's like a big snowball effect across everything. So I'm obviously I have an opinion, right? I have an opinion about
That's why you're here,
the
my
the
friend.
the way to do it and how I would coach others. But I have seen plenty of leaders be effective doing it the other way. I just don't believe you can be effective in all times when everything with everything else going on in that other way.
And I also think times have changed. I think people have a different level of expectation. And again, that may be a very culturally myopic view of things.
Mhm.
Again, not my intent to be an idiot, but often I stumble into that territory, right? But I think today's workforce and the generational shift we're seeing, they expect a little bit more. There's less respect in the Western cultures of hierarchy by title and more by meritocracy, right? You do what you do, and I will come with you. I'm not just going to obey and report and adhere because you carry a title, right? And then do you see that in your experience very different culturally, or do you see that as a sort of a more global movement right now?
I think it's so there's a couple prisms, right?
Yeah.
Right. So we have the geographic or regional or cultural prisms, and then now we also have generational prisms,
Mm.
right? So I'm Gen X, right? And if you look at the workforce, right, you probably still have a very small percentage of maybe baby boomers that are in the workforce, maybe at senior positions, some of whom should keep on to the next phase of life. You've got a big chunk of folks like us, right, in Gen X, and some of us are starting to think about next phase. And then you've got millennial, and then Gen Z, and now at the very edge of the workforce, even Gen A is starting to
Mhm.
come in. And I'll tell you what's interesting is I think that for a while it was very in vogue to, at least in America, to kind of mock the successive generations, and but I also think we look at like what we had in our formative years versus each successive generation. And so it's been very, very different. And when you're talking about the more recent generations who have always had every bit of information ever created in the palm of their hand, and folks like myself who had physical encyclopedias that we had to go
Yes.
look up stuff in that were basically out of date the instant you had them, but you didn't even know
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Ignorance is bliss, and we were happy. And I think that when you layer these things together, and then it's a trap, right? Because the instant we try to assume one thing is true about this generation or one thing is true about this country, we find so many exceptions. We know it's not right, but it's a trap we allow ourselves to fall in because there's a million points of information around us,
Yeah.
right, that tell us here's this generation behaves this way, this country behaves this way, whatever. And then even if we say we're very intelligent about the way the different generations happen, we're going to adapt our styles and do all these things to kind of meet people where they are emotionally. Then we make the assumption that those same generational things are true in other countries, and holy cow, it's not. It's not. It's not. It's not.
It's
Right.
not at
And
all.
and so it's we go all the way back to the beginning of this conversation. It has to be about intent. Like we have to listen for intent. We have to just listen, period. Like listening is an underappreciated skill set, I think, in leaders today.
So true.
We should ask good questions. And then the thing that I think is lost so often now is back to expectations, is that when we ask questions, even simple questions like, how are you today? We should care about the response. Now, we should care about the response, but not to the extent that our colleagues, our employees, our teams feel that everything they care about has to be everything I care about, or I have to care about everything they care about, and also that we don't cross that line of becoming their therapist, right?
Yeah.
Because and if you're a very emotionally intelligent, emotionally engaged leader, that's a line that you dance on all the time.
Of
Certainly, I
course.
have a bunch of times, right? And
Yeah, me
and
too.
and it's great, like when you feel like you can celebrate successes with your team. Oh my gosh, this person, their son just graduated high school, or they just won the spelling bee in their state. I mean, these things are amazing, but it can't be about everything. Oh, they got in a car accident. That sucks, but we can't talk about this for weeks on end, right? This has to be the thing we move on from. So it's a line, and everyone, all of us need to understand where is that line for each of us, because
Mhm.
it's gray, not black and white. and how far into it can we go, and when are we willing to lean in more, because this is important in this moment to engage this person, this group of people, this country, whatever, in a certain way, versus when do we have to pull back because this is now weight that if I take on myself will slow me down as a leader. If it slows me down as a leader, then the whole organization slows down, and that's not acceptable. So it's a lot of it is back to, like I said, we listen for intent, we ask good questions, we care about the responses, but we also have to kind of understand where we are too as leaders. Right? It cannot be exclusively about them.
No, I agree with that. I think we're always treading this line and this balance. I mean, in this conversation, even there are nuance. There may be even rules to abide by when it comes to different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you've got to balance that understanding with understanding the individual. In the case, we can't just assume the rules apply to everybody, right?
Yeah, I think it's one good thing to know is always just what are the rules, and that, not only can that vary by country, that can even vary by kind of function within a company. I think there was an organization that I was working with, and there was a thing we just weren't allowed to say ever for legal reasons, and objectively, I could understand why someone would argue that the thing that we could not say, people would feel like it was true and we should be able to say it, but I also understood the kind of nuance of the words that were behind it and why, and it was always, but eventually you get to a point where it's so built into yourself, like you have this kind of, here's a dating phrase, a Rolodex, like a Rolodex, some roles that go through, and we just we know where to go and when, but the other thing is like humor is a great thing, right? Humor is awesome and I love it, and I think I'm objectively hilarious, but not everyone agrees. But humor does not cross borders often, does not cross cultures often, because so much of humor has to do with the phrasing of words or timing of words, and so it's important to kind of understand these things that work and these don't, and the rules. And I think it's also great too is if you're engaged as a leader and you say something and it doesn't get the response, positive, negative, whatever, that you were anticipating that it would.
Yeah.
That's the moment you should pause and say, guys, I just said this and I thought that was going to land a certain way, but I'm not hearing the response. Maybe everyone's having lunch or dinner or breakfast or all three whereas around the world, but help me understand what I just said there and what your reaction is. And that it's great to have that in that moment versus waiting a week or a month and asking, hey, I said this on a call and no responded, because they may not even remember what you said or how you said it. So asking for that feedback in the moment, and I think leaders should always be willing to ask for feedback.
I do like that. I heavily subscribe to that. I think that it is like a good leadership trait when something goes wrong with the team, not instantly thinking, well, what have they done? I think the really good, strong, confident leader will go, what environment have I created where this can happen? And what can we do about it?
I'll tell you one of the, if I were to just write down like Crispin's rules for leadership, one of my own personal rules that I've always believed by, and that I know has been popular with my teams, is that praise goes down and blame goes up. Right. And that just has to be true. Has to be true, because if something goes wrong, then the failure, if we want to call it that, has to reside in leadership. Has to. Now, an individual may have done something wrong, may have made a mistake, may have purposely screwed up, may have not followed instructions, but there's an environmental thing that was created. If they didn't follow instructions, we should ask, did they know the instructions? If they didn't follow process, we should understand, was the process clear? Was there ambiguity here? If they just were bad at their job and they did this, we should understand why didn't we notice that before? Like, how are we doing performance management? So, the negative, the blame should always go up and the praise should always go down. That's just not everyone in my experience has lived by that, unfortunately, but for big organizations, for me, if there was one thing that I think my people would say nice things about me in my absence, it's that.
I like that. Well, what a lovely way to round off this conversation. This has been one of those conversations where it's just good to hear from someone who's had so much experience of this, about in the Venn diagram of local leadership and global leadership, which things sit squarely between the two things. These are the things that actually leadership are about, but also to understand that the nuance, around the edges of when you move into a global role, which more and more people, I suspect, are going to come across, whether it's leading project teams, functional teams, organizations, goodness me, whatever in the future. I think that's going to become more prevalent as the workforce kind of is more distributed around the globe.
Completely agree.
Before I let you go, I have this little bit in the show I call sticky notes, and you have given lots of little soundbitey gems. I would love to get from you your 3 pieces of advice that we could stick on 3 little sticky notes around our screen to remind us. But if we are thinking about building genuinely competent, confident global leaders, what would your 3 little sticky notes be that you'd leave us with?
The one I always start with is introspection. You, as a leader, you need to know yourself. You need to know where you are good and where you are weak. And because if you don't do that, our natural tendency is to create clones of ourselves and our teams, and therefore the things you're good at will be amplified, but your weaknesses will be too. So if you start with we know introspection, we know ourselves. I think that's a great one. The other one, which I've said a bunch of times here, is you have to listen. And I think that's, as an American, pick your stereotype for Americans. We have a certain perspective about the globe and our position in it and ego and all of these things. But we also have this naivete about English, right? So we speak English, you speak English, and everything we say is completely understood by the other. And that's not always true. It's very, very not true. And I think, you and I in the pre-call even talked about just the word pants, right? The word pants is a really good example. It means something for me that's different for you, right? And so we should always, as leaders, we should always listen. And where something sounds different or nuanced, or a phrase is being used in a way that we didn't anticipate, we should ask. We should just say, "Here's what I think I heard, and here's how I interpret it. Is that what you meant?" So this notion of kind of listening, it's back to listen for intent, but just listen in general, right? I think that's a great way. And I think the other thing is you have to if you want to be a successful global leader, you have to be willing to create an environment where people feel comfort. They believe that their words will be heard, even if they're not always acted upon. You have to create the environment where their words will be heard, because back to tokenism, if we don't, then they will not feel like they belong. And if they don't feel like they belong, they will not add good ideas, and we may miss something amazing.
I love it. Crispin, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you and listen to you. Before I finally let you go, if people would like to find out a bit more about you, about the Leadership Studio, where can they go? Where can they track you down, my friend?
A few places. So first of all, there's always great to start with our website, which is leadership-studio.com. So leadership-studio.com. And then I think increasingly, because of the way the world works, a lot of people just find me on LinkedIn. So it's Crispin Thompson, or you can find the Leadership Studio on LinkedIn. And if you want to hear more about just how I think about emotional intelligence, you can search Crispin Thompson on Amazon. You can go find a book I wrote and those things as well. So there's a lot of things out there these days.
Brilliant. Crispin, it has been fantastic to meet you. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
No, absolute pleasure. You take care, my friend.
Cheers.
Okay, everyone. So that was Crispin Thompson. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about him or any of the things that we've talked about in today's show, please check out the show notes. So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forward. If you have, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Goram, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.